A bit of a punk there. Anyways, he was caught and crucified by the Persians about 523. His example of naval imperialism, the first in Greek history, suggests the growing commercial unification of the Aegean. It was an early example, too. May have been a germ, a seed, you know. The tunnel of Polycrates for water supply, his harbor works, and the completion of a new temple of Hera on the largest scale ever attempted for an Aegean temple, were the greatest physical works in Greece down to the end of the 6th century. To his lavish court he drew from Chios Anacreon, and from Italy the poet Ibycus, I-B-Y-C-U-S, active shortly after 550, a great composer of choral songs and love poetry. Famous jewelers, doctors, and other skilled men also graced Samos in its apogee. Now, it says the tunnel that Polycrates made for a water supply, and also his harbor works, were the greatest physical works in Greece down to the end of the 6th century. It's interesting because the tunnel, he had a nice walled city, and there was a nice spring on yonder side of the mountain on this little island. Yonder, straight through that damned mountain. Obnoxious situation, but that was true. They could do an aqueduct around the mountain for the water supply. But what if there's a situation and they were under siege and the enemy destroyed their aqueduct? So what they did was they tunneled through the mountain. Take too long to tunnel from one side. Far too long. It took too long to tunnel from both sides, but they decided they had to tunnel from both sides. There's videos on YouTube about possibly how he did that, but they ended up tunneling from both sides with all these primitive engineering back then, and ended up meeting the other tunnel 24 inches off. It was like a 4-foot tall tunnel, 24 inches off. And then they had another larger tunnel beside that. The first one was just a working space. But at any rate, it sort of helped the city to be invincible against siege. It's on an island. It's rough enough already. It's got a good navy. If you can even get there, get on the island, it's got a good water supply through a damn tunnel, and good luck. Jewelers, doctors, and other skilled men graced Samos in its apogee. So now we go to the Western Greeks for just a bit and look at what happened over yonder. The colonization of the shores of the central and western Mediterranean continued on into the 6th century, then slowly came to a halt. Now, part of the reason for this is they sort of ran out of room. They came up to a battering ram ahead with a lot of other people, and part of the reason for this is because the cultural conditions changed. It was just different culture, and these people didn't have the drive to go do that, and there just wasn't as much place to go do it. They'd have done it. They had done it. Greece had outgrown itself, and it colonized the Mediterranean, and now it was done, essentially. The parts that were still left were in contention. In Africa, in western Sicily, and in Spain, the Greeks by this time were encroaching upon the preserves marked by the Phoenician trading posts. These posts were collected into one great maritime empire by Carthage when Tyre fell under Assyrian control. And Carthage allied itself with the Etruscans of central Italy to stop the Greek expansion. The Etruscans of central Italy. Carthage allied itself with the Etruscans of central Italy. Later, Rome was to salt the earth after they destroyed Carthage. But anyways, one of the greatest battles took place off the new Greek settlement of Alalia in Corsica about 535. Though it was won by the Greeks, they had to evacuate the colony. A bit of a Pyrrhic victory, perhaps. By 500, as we shall see more fully in studying the rise of Rome, the Carthaginians, Greeks, and Etruscans had battled each other. Now, we're not going to see that later in the rise of Rome in this Greek series. Maybe we'll look at Rome after, though. But later on, they look at the fact that the Carthaginians, Greeks, and Etruscans had battled each other to a standstill. In their stalemate, they left the way open for a native power to conquer each separately. The major Greek states of eastern Sicily and southern Italy, however, flourished magnificently. They built huge temples, some of which still survive at Paestum, Selinus, and Agrigentum, and made statues of terracotta and stone in patterns essentially like those of Greece, but sometimes of a provincial or realistic flavor. Stesichorus, Ebaicus, and other poets contributed to the growth of archaic literature. Philosophic thought, introduced from the Aegean in the middle of the 6th century, took root quickly and fired native geniuses like Parmenides and Empedocles in the next century. The wealthy Etruscans had turned eagerly to Greek culture since the middle of the 7th century, the middle of the 600s, and by 500 such native states as Segesta in Sicily and Rome in Italy were borrowing extensively from the attractive ideas and products of Hellas. Even by 500, and Rome wasn't to really rise to its peak for many centuries, 4 or 5 centuries from now, 6 centuries from now by some arguments. Rome rose to its peak, 7 centuries maybe, but here they are beginning to absorb Greece already by 500. Like the home states, the Greek cities of the West quarreled incessantly with each other, regardless of the outside threats. Sybaris, the greatest polis of South Italy, turned toward democracy, then fell into internal dissensions, which permitted its jealous rival, Croton, to destroy it utterly around 510 BC. These are Greek colonies that are just settled, and they look at each other and they fight. Throughout the 6th century, control of these Greek cities lay largely in the hands of landed aristocracies, but by 500, the Greeks of the West were progressing beyond this state. The result was a wave of tyrants who employed the resources of their subjects in large mercenary armies and imperialism in the 5th century. Alright, leave the Western Greeks, let's look at the Eastern Greeks over by the Black Sea and towards Turkey and Ionia. Even more prosperous and even more seriously threatened were the states at the other pole of the Greek world, the east coast of the Aegean. These began to rise in significance as the interior of Asia Minor became pacified and as Greek colonization penetrated the Black Sea. After the fall of Hittite civilization, Asia Minor had been as backward as was Greece in the Dark Ages, but by the 8th century, a consolidated kingdom of Phrygia had appeared, with a capital at Gordium. So we're going to skip down a bit and talk about archaic civilization, and generalizations about civilization as such. All over the Greek world, men were growing rich enough to rebuild wooden chapels into stone temples. These were still generally made from limestone or other easily worked stone, which was stuccoed and painted in vivid colors. The form of the temple was that evolved in the age of the Revolution, but architects steadily refined its aesthetics and optical principles. The great international shrines of Olympia, Delphi, Delos, Ulysses, and others also began at this time to assume a monumental dress which included gateways, porticos, treasuries, many monuments, and even theaters about the temples and their altars. A sacred precinct thenceforth was an extended area filled with the riches of the Greek world. As the urban centers of the city-states grew larger and more complex, secular public buildings became necessary. The most expensive item was that of walls for the whole city. Marketplaces received fountain buildings, council chambers, and the like. Harbors were improved and regarded by moles, M-O-L-E-S. I don't know what that is exactly. Now it says the most expensive item was walls for the whole city. Of any improvement you could make, putting a stone wall up around the whole damn thing was the most costly. The temples and the temple precincts were increasingly embellished by reliefs and statues. On the Acropolis at Athens stood a host of elegantly gowned maidens, K-O-R-A-I, a vocabulary word, Korai, K-O-R-A-I. 14 of these have survived. That's a lot. to survive all the way back from then, because then